I remember the first thing I felt when I woke up wasn't panic, was emptiness. The sterile white ceiling above me blurred with the harsh hospital lights, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was or why my body felt so heavy. But then the beeping of machines, the faint scent of antiseptic, and the distant murmur of nurses brought it all rushing back. I was in a hospital bed, fighting my way back from a coma. And the world I'd known had shifted in ways I couldn't yet understand. As I tried to move my fingers, panic crept in. I searched the room for a familiar face, for the one person I'd always believed would be there, no matter what. My son, Daniel. He was my only child, my pride, my reason for pushing through every hardship life had thrown at me. But the chair beside my bed was empty, and the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I called out, my voice barely a whisper, but no one answered. In that moment, a cold realization began to settle in my chest. I was alone. But what I didn't know then was that my story was about to take a turn I never could have predicted. The person who would sit by my side, holding my hand through the darkest nights, wasn't the one I'd spent my life loving and sacrificing for. And when Daniel finally walked back into that hospital room, the look on his face told me everything had changed. If you've ever wondered what true loyalty looks like or how it feels to be betrayed by your own flesh and blood, stay with me. Because what happened next would test the very meaning of family, forgiveness, and love. From the moment Daniel was born, it felt like the world had given me a second chance. I was a single mother, barely 22, with more dreams than money and more hope than certainty. My own parents had passed away when I was young. So when I held Daniel for the first time, I promised him and myself that I would be the kind of parent I'd always wished for. Our little apartment was filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and the kind of love that made even the hardest days feel bearable. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. But I never let Daniel see how tired I was. To him, I was invincible. As Daniel grew, so did our bond. He was a bright, sensitive boy, always quick to hug me after a long shift or bring me wildflowers he'd picked from the park. We had our rituals, Sunday pancakes, movie nights on the couch, then long walks where we'd talk about everything and nothing. I was proud of the young man he was become, kind, ambitious, and fiercely loyal, or so I believed. I poured every ounce of myself into being his mother, sometimes at the expense of my own needs. I told myself it was worth it, that one day he'd understand the sacrifices I made. But as Daniel entered his late teens, I started to notice small changes. He became quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours in his room or out with friends I barely knew. Our conversations grew shorter, and the easy laughter we once shared was replaced by awkward silences. I chalked it up to adolescence, telling myself it was just a phase. Still, there were moments that stung: a missed birthday dinner, a forgotten Mother's Day card, a cold shoulder when I tried to ask about his life. I tried not to take it personally, but late at night, when the apartment was silent, I'd lie awake wondering if I was losing him. Family gatherings were always complicated. My late husband's family lived out of state and rarely visited, and I had no siblings. It was just Daniel and me, a team of 2 against the world. I clung to that idea even as the distance between us grew. I'd see other mothers and sons laughing together at the grocery store or in the park, and a pang of envy would twist in my chest. I missed the little boy who used to run into my arms, the teenager who once confided in me about his dreams and fears. Looking back, I realize I ignored the warning signs, the late-night phone calls, the way he'd flinch when I asked about his plans, the growing pile of unopened mail on his desk. I wanted so badly to believe that our bond was unbreakable, that nothing could come between us. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming, cracks I refused to see, even as they threatened to split our world apart. Still, I held on to hope. I believed that, no matter how far he drifted, Daniel would always come back to me. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We forgive, we wait, we love, sometimes blindly. I never imagined that the day would come when I'd need him the most and he wouldn't be there. But before everything changed, before the hospital and the coma, I was just a mother doing her best, loving her son with everything she had, and praying it would be enough. It started with a headache that wouldn't go away. At first, I brushed it off, just another sign of getting older, I told myself. I was used to pushing through discomfort, used to putting everyone else's needs before my own. But as the days passed, the pain grew sharper, radiating down my neck and making it hard to focus at work. I'd catch myself forgetting simple things where I'd left my keys, whether I'd paid the electric bill, the name of a coworker I'd known for years. I tried to hide it from Daniel, not wanting to worry him. But I could see the concern flicker across his face when he caught me rubbing my temples or wincing as I stood up too quickly. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, I dropped a plate. It shattered on the floor, and I just stood there, staring at the pieces, feeling strangely detached. Daniel came out of his room, earbuds dangling from his neck, and looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice flat. I forced a smile and told him I was fine, just tired. He shrugged and disappeared back into his room, the door clicking shut behind him. I knelt to pick up the shards, my hands trembling, and wondered when he'd stop seeing me as someone who needed care. The headaches grew worse. I started missing work, calling in sick more often than I cared to admit. My boss was understanding at first, but I could sense her patience wearing thin. Bills piled up, and I found myself rationing groceries, skipping meals so Daniel wouldn't have to. I tried to talk to him about what was happening, but he was always in a rush heading out to meet friends, glued to his phone or lost in his own world. Our conversations became transactional. "Did you eat? What time will you be home? Can you pick up milk?" The warmth between us had cooled, replaced by a polite distance that felt colder than any argument. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I stumbled to the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror pale, drawn, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I pressed a hand to my chest and tried to steady my breathing. In that moment, fear gripped me. What if something was really wrong? What if I wasn't just tired, but sick? I thought about calling Daniel, but I didn't want to wake him. I didn't want to be a burden. The next morning, I tried to talk to him as he rushed out the door. "Daniel, can we sit down tonight? I need to talk to you about something." He barely looked up from his phone. "I've got plans, Mom. Can it wait?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Sure, it can wait." But inside, I knew I was running out of time. The days blurred together. I made a doctor's appointment, but Daniel didn't offer to come with me. I sat alone in the waiting room, scrolling through old photos of us birthday parties, vacations, silly selfies from years ago. The doctor ordered tests, her brow furrowing as she examined me. "You need to take this seriously," she said gently. "If you feel worse, go to the ER. Don't wait." I nodded, promising I would, but deep down, I was terrified. That weekend, Daniel came home late, the smell of alcohol clinging to his clothes. I waited up for him, desperate to bridge the gap between us. "Daniel, I'm worried about my health. I need you to be here for me." He rolled his eyes, frustration flashing across his face. "Mom, I have my own life. I can't drop everything every time you feel a little sick." His words stung, sharper than any pain in my body. I wanted to scream, to beg him to see me, but all I could do was nod and retreat to my room. Lying in bed that night, stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with fears I couldn't voice. I thought about all the times I'd been there for Daniel, every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every dream he'd chased. I wondered when the roles had reversed, when I'd become invisible in my own home. The next morning, the world spun as I tried to stand and darkness closed in around me. My last thought before everything went black was a silent plea. "Daniel, please don't leave me alone." The morning it happened, the world felt strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. I remember trying to sit up, my head pounding, the room spinning in slow, nauseating circles. I called out for Daniel, my voice barely more than a croak, but there was no answer. He'd left early for class, or maybe he was at a friend's house. I couldn't remember. I tried to stand, gripping the edge of the dresser for support, but my legs buckled beneath me. The last thing I saw was the faded photograph of Daniel and me on the nightstand, our smiles frozen in time before the floor rushed up to meet me and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the back of an ambulance, the world a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. I heard someone say possible stroke, and panic clawed at my chest. I tried to speak, to ask for Daniel, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. The paramedic squeezed my hand, her eyes kind but distant. "We're taking you to the hospital, sweetheart. Just hold on." I drifted in and out of consciousness, this siren wailing above my heartbeat, fear and confusion swirling together until I slipped beneath the surface again. Later, I learned that a neighbor had found me collapsed in the hallway, barely breathing. She'd called 911 and the paramedics had arrived just in time. Daniel, meanwhile, was unreachable, his phone off, his whereabouts unknown. The hospital staff tried to contact him, but hours passed before he finally answered. When he arrived, I was already in a coma, hooked up to machines that breathed for me. My body a battleground between life and death. I can only imagine what he saw when he walked into that sterile room. His mother, pale and motionless, surrounded by tubes and monitors. The nurses told me later that he stood at the foot of the bed, silent and shell-shocked, his face a mask of guilt and fear. But instead of rushing to my side, instead of holding my hand or whispering words of comfort, Daniel hesitated. He paced the hallway, arguing with doctors, demanding answers they couldn't give. When the reality of my condition sank in, something inside him seemed to break. He called a few relatives, distant cousins, an aunt he barely knew, hoping someone else would take responsibility. He told the nurses he had work, that he couldn't stay overnight. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, his voice flat, eyes darting anywhere but my face. But tomorrow came and went, and Daniel didn't return. The nurses left messages pleading with him to visit, to sign forms, to simply be present. Each time, he made excuses. A big exam, a job interview, a friend in crisis. Days turned into a week. And still, my son stayed away. The staff did their best to fill the void. They brushed my hair, read to me from magazines, played soft music in the hope that something familiar might reach me. But nothing could replace the ache of Daniel's absence. Even in the darkness of my coma, I felt it a cold, hollow space where his love should have been. I'd always believed that no matter what, Daniel would be there for me. That's what family meant. But as the days passed and the chair beside my bed remained empty, the truth became impossible to ignore. The moment of betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost invisible, a series of choices, each one a little more selfish than the last. Daniel chose to leave, to put his own comfort above my need. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he felt helpless. Maybe he simply didn't know how to face the possibility of losing me. But whatever his reasons, the result was the same. I was alone, fighting for my life, while my only son walked away. And yet, as the world faded to black around me, I had no idea that someone else was about to step into that empty space. Someone I never expected. Someone who would change everything. The days after Daniel's absence blurred into a strange, suspended reality, a world where time moved forward. But I remained trapped in the stillness of my hospital bed. I was told later that the nurses checked on me constantly, adjusting my blankets, speaking softly as if their words might reach me through the fog. But the chair beside me, the one meant for family, stayed empty. The staff grew used to the sight, their faces a mix of sympathy and quiet judgment. "Her son hasn't been by," I overheard one nurse whisper to another. Not once since the first day. The words stung, even in my unconscious state, as if some part of me could still feel the ache of abandonment. But then something changed. On the third day, a new presence entered my room, a presence that would become my lifeline. It was my sister, Evelyn. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a bitter argument over our mother's will had left us both wounded and stubborn. I never expected to see her again, let alone sitting at my bedside, her hand wrapped gently around mine. The nurses told me she arrived with a suitcase and a determined look, refusing to leave even when visiting hours ended. She read to me from old family photo albums, her voice trembling as she recounted childhood memories, hoping to spark something inside me. Evelyn's loyalty was a stark contrast to Daniel's absence. She called the doctors every morning, demanded updates, and made sure I was never alone. She brought fresh flowers, changed the water in the vase, even played my favorite songs on her phone, filling the sterile room with warmth. When the nurses asked about Daniel, she simply shook her head, her eyes clouded with a mix of disappointment and protectiveness. "He's not ready," she'd say quietly. "But I'm here." She's not alone. The practical consequences of Daniel's absence were immediate and harsh. There were forms to sign, bills to pay, decisions to make about my care. Evelyn stepped in without hesitation, navigating the bureaucracy with a calm I'd forgotten she possessed. She coordinated with my insurance, spoke to social workers, and made sure my apartment was safe and my bills were covered. She even reached out to Daniel, leaving voicemails and texts, urging him to come see me. But he never responded. Each unanswered message was another crack in the image I'd held of my son, a reminder that love, no matter how fierce, can't always bridge the distance between two people. Emotionally, the contrast between Evelyn and Daniel was impossible to ignore. Evelyn's presence was steady, her loyalty unwavering, even as she struggled with her own guilt and regret. I learned later that she'd sat by my bed for hours, apologizing for the years we'd lost, promising to make things right if I'd just wake up. She wept openly, her tears falling onto my hand as she begged for forgiveness, not just for the past, but for every moment she hadn't been there when I needed her. In those quiet hours, she became the sister I'd always longed for, the family I thought I'd lost. Meanwhile, Daniel's absence became a shadow that hung over every conversation. The nurses grew colder when his name was mentioned, their patience wearing thin. Friends who visited asked awkward questions, their eyes darting to the empty chair. "Has Daniel been by?" they'd ask, and Evelyn would force a smile, changing the subject. The silence spoke volumes. Yet, in the midst of all this pain, something unexpected began to happen. The anger I felt toward Daniel was matched by a growing gratitude for Evelyn. Her loyalty, her willingness to show up when it mattered most, began to heal wounds I didn't know I still carried. I realized that family isn't just about blood or history. It's about who stays when things fall apart, who chooses to love you even when it's hard. As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn's presence became my anchor. She was there for every doctor's update, every small sign of progress, every setback. And though I couldn't speak or move, I felt her love like a lifeline pulling me back from the edge. I didn't know if Daniel would ever return or if our relationship could survive this betrayal. But I knew without a doubt that I wasn't alone. And that in itself was a kind of miracle. Did Daniel finally returned on a rainy Thursday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after I'd slipped into the coma. The hospital corridors were quiet, the air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and wilted flowers. He walked in with his head down, shoulders hunched, as if bracing himself for a storm he knew he deserved. I was still unconscious, but I would later hear from Evelyn and the nurses how the moment unfolded, how the past and present collided in that small, sterile room. He expected to find me alone, just as he'd left me. Instead, he found Evelyn sitting by my bed, her hand resting protectively on mine. She looked up as he entered, her eyes sharp and tired, her expression a mixture of relief and simmering anger. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor, a reminder that life was still moving forward, even if everything else felt frozen. Daniel hesitated in the doorway, his gaze flickering from my still form to Evelyn's unwavering stare. I just wanted to check on her," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn didn't move. 3 weeks, Daniel. 3 weeks and not a word. "Where have you been?" Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Daniel looked away, shame coloring his cheeks. "I couldn't handle it. I thought someone else would be here. I didn't know what to do." Evelyn stood, her presence filling the room. "You didn't know what to do, so you left her alone. She needed you, Daniel. She needed her son." The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. Daniel's hands shook as he tried to defend himself. "I was scared, okay? I've never seen her like this. I thought if I stayed away, it wouldn't be real. I'm sorry, Aunt Evelyn. I really am." For the first time, Daniel saw the toll my illness had taken, not just on me, but on everyone who loved me. He saw the exhaustion in Evelyn's eyes, the stack of medical bills on the table, the get-well cards from friends and neighbors. He saw the empty chair that should have been his and the space he'd left behind. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. He had abandoned his mother when she needed him most. Evelyn's anger softened, just a little. "It's not too late, Daniel. But you have to decide what kind of son you want to be. She's still here. She's still fighting. Are you going to fight for her too?" Daniel nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. He crossed the room and took my hand, his grip tentative but desperate. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." In that moment, the walls between them began to crumble. Regret and love mingled in the air, raw and unspoken. Daniel realized that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but it was possible. And as he sat beside me, Evelyn quietly stepped back, giving him space to make amends. The turning point had come not just for Daniel, but for all of us. The next chapter would be written by the choices we made from here on out. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds. My mind was foggy, my body weak, but I was alive. I blinked, trying to make sense of the faces around me. Evelyn was there, her eyes red-rimmed, but shining with relief. And beside her, holding my hand with a grip that trembled, was Daniel. For a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming. But the weight of his touch, the raw emotion in his eyes, told me this was real. The days that followed were a blur of tests, gentle encouragement from nurses, and whispered conversations. I learned, piece by piece, what had happened while I was gone. Evelyn filled in the gaps, her voice steady but laced with pain. She told me how she'd come as soon as she heard, how she'd sat by my side every day, refusing to let me face the darkness alone. She didn't shy away from the truth about Daniel either. She told me how he'd stayed away, paralyzed by fear and guilt, and how he'd finally returned, broken and desperate for forgiveness. Hearing it all was like reopening an old wound. I wanted to be angry, to demand answers, but when I looked at Daniel, his face gaunt, his eyes haunted, I saw the little boy I'd raised, lost and afraid. He wept as he apologized, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was scared. I didn't know how to help. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. But I was wrong. I should have been here. I should have been your son." There was pain in his confession, but also hope. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for him, was for me too. Holding on to anger would only poison what was left of our relationship. So, with Evelyn's hand in mine, I told Daniel the truth, that I was hurt, that I felt abandoned, but that I still loved him. "We can't change the past," I said softly, "but we can choose what we do next." The days that followed were filled with small, tentative steps toward healing. Daniel visited every day, helping with my recovery, listening to Evelyn's stories and slowly rebuilding the trust he'd broken. There were awkward silences, moments when old wounds threatened to reopen, but there was also laughter, hesitant at first, then genuine. Evelyn and I found our way back to each other, too. The years of distance melted away as we shared memories, regrets, and dreams for the future. Not every bond was mended. Some friends drifted away, unable to understand the choices we'd made. But the family I'd thought was lost had been reshaped, forged in the fire of pain and forgiveness. I learned that love isn't always easy or perfect. Sometimes it means showing up even when it hurts. Sometimes it means letting go of old resentments to make room for something new. As I left the hospital, supported by both my son and my sister, I felt a fragile hope blooming inside me. We were different now, scarred, but stronger. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I believed we could walk it together. Looking back, I realized that survival isn't just about waking up from a coma, it's about choosing to live, even after your heart has been broken. I used to believe that family meant unconditional loyalty, that love alone could hold us together through anything. But life taught me a harder, more beautiful truth. Real loyalty is a choice, not a guarantee. It's shown in the quiet moments, in the willingness to stay when things get uncomfortable, in the courage to face our own failures and try again. Forgiving Daniel wasn't easy. There are scars that will never fully fade, and boundaries I've learned to set for my own peace. But I also learned that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It's a way to release the weight of anger and make space for healing. Evelyn's unexpected loyalty reminded me that sometimes the people who show up aren't the ones you expect, but they're the ones you need. Her presence helped me see that it's never too late to mend what's broken, to reach out, or to start over. If you're listening to my story and you felt abandoned, betrayed, or invisible in your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. Your pain is real, but so is your strength. You have the right to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to open your heart to those who truly show up for you. Healing isn't linear, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing yourself. Every single day as I move forward, I carry both the lessons and the love with me. My story isn't over, and neither is yours. If you're waiting for a sign to reach out, to forgive, or to let go, maybe this is it. And if you want to hear what happened when Daniel and I faced our next challenge, or how Evelyn and I rebuilt our sisterhood, stay with me. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we're still writing.